are talking about this is a watershed event. They don't happen very often, once or twice in our lifetime. And usually they're specific to countries. Like Katrina, the hurricane in New Orleans, was a real watershed event about how we treat each other, how we act in society, et cetera. It was a big event. The death of Princess Diana really affected how people felt about the royal family and how they talked about how we personally interact. So you get major events, we call them watershed events, and this is unique because it's a global watershed event. And we never had a global watershed event quite like this one. The crisis in 2008, 2009 was something close. We'll talk about that a little bit. But this COVID crisis is especially unique. So just a real quick brief, Salome, you did a great introduction. We just briefly say who we are. We do a lot of work with big data, the Garrison group. We look for insights. What's the big data tell us that's really unique? And then we help develop strategies and we execute on those strategies. And our clients are a lot of big multinationals that you're probably familiar with. IKEA, Coke, Avon, et cetera. In fact, in Georgia, we work with the FS group, Maastricht beer, which I love saying that name. It's one of my favorite beers. Maastricht. So I worked around the thing. We're going to show some actual emphasis on Georgia. And for people who are watching this later, we're talking about Georgia, the country. A lot of Americans don't realize that when we talk about Georgia. Anyway, so that's who we are. So the COVID crisis is really changed the way things are happening. So the first thing you need to do as a marketer, it's always about the consumer. It starts, begins, middle, and end. It's about the consumer. So what's happening with the consumer? You need to really understand your consumer. So what's happening during the crisis and what's going to be happening coming out of the crisis? How are they dealing with it? Not in general, not market-wide, but who is your specific consumer? So we'll show some examples of that. Then how does that affect the brand? Because your brand proposition is always relevant to who your target is. So how do you position your brand based on what your target's gone through? That's what we mean by brand pivot. So we'll give you some examples of some pivot we worked on during the 2009 crisis in Russia, and then talk about what it could mean using Apple as an example in Georgia about how it could be affected. Okay, so the first thing is look at consumers. So this is interesting. This is a perceptual map. So we look at consumers, we group them based on how the way we do the segmentation is based on how they consume across maybe 4,000 or 5,000 brands, and then across 300, 400 categories. If people tend to do like things with like things, cars they buy, the juices they drink, where they go on vacation. So what we do, we cluster those people, and this is a group of segments. I believe it's 8 segments of urban lifestyle. This is 18 up until the point they have children. Getting married wouldn't change it a lot. What really changes your life is when you have children. And that brings us into parent segments. We have people like balancers, which we'll talk about. In fact, going back a slide, we're going to talk about butterflies in the upper left side a little bit. And then talk about the parent segment, and then, of course, the senior segment that comes in. They tend to get less segments the older you get, because people tend to conform more, and they're more dispersed younger. So what's happening with your target during the crisis? What's the biggest change in the lifestyle of your consumer? So how can your brand help them deal with those changing needs? So those are about need states. And then what are their concerns, their worries, the things that keep them up at night? What are their hopes, their aspirations? Those are really affect the emotional value of a brand. So how can I help the customer better deal with their worries and their concerns? We call those tension points. And finally, what is the target's coping strategy? How are they dealing with this crisis? And how can I help them better adapt to the crisis? So again, we got the biggest thing that's happening is how this has actually affected society. What we find is, we'll do a segmentation, I'm sure, in Georgia after the crisis, and we can share it. But what is happening now, and what you'll see is they pivot. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. They'll pivot to the right side. And it'll be from more of a me aspiration to a we aspiration. A lot of people in the lower, on the right side are already there, but a lot of the segments on the left side are going to shift more towards we than they were before. And that's a big change in society. You'll see people being nicer in traffic, believe it or not. when they go back to the life as normal. People be nicer in traffic. They'll be more considerate. It could be more about we and less about me. And that's a great change. It comes out of a crisis. And we saw that with New York life after 9/11. The way that New Yorkers reacted to each other post 9/11 has still not gone back the way it was pre 9/11. It really brought in some really positive things. With all the bad news, there's this positive change about that, the me versus we. So, example, we had a brand in Russia called Gold Mine Beer. It's owned by the Ethos Group. And it was all, the position was all about, as you can imagine with the name, it was very aspirational in the early 2000s in Russia, very much a me attitude in Russia in the early 2000s. So a lot of you have been there and read about it. So it was really called Gold for the Gold was the obvious slogan for it, right? The tagline in Russian, go for the gold. Well, they shifted because it's changed, and they shifted to the gold is all around you, appreciate it. And making that shift early in 2009 had a major effect. Their sales increased 64% during the crisis because they made their brand relevant from this me to this we. And just what can I appreciate about my world? And it changed during the crisis. So that was a very good example of how it can be done. So let's get a little deeper in it. Let's look at balancers. This is going to talk specifically about balancers. Let's study them a little bit. Then I want to give an example with Apple, how Apple could take some of the things they do with their portfolio and their pricing during the crisis as an example. But there's some questions afterwards about how it could affect your brand. We could talk about other brands as well. So the balancers, again, start with the consumer, equal gender distribution, 25 to 54, higher level of education, middle to high socioeconomic class. They really want to enjoy the time with their family. We call balancers because they're trying to balance that. You'll see them homing from work. In the old days when they're at work, they might at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, homing from work and figure out what they're going to do with their family this weekend. That'd be part of who they were. They worry about, all these things. Can they do all these things or feel guilty if they're spending time at home with their kids with so they leave work to go see their kids in a play, they feel guilty they let their colleagues at work down. But if they don't go to the play, their kids play at school, they feel like they let the family down. So they got the pervasive feeling of guilt. I'm a balancer father, so I think both balancers get that. You're always feeling guilty that you're not balancing it right. You got all these plates in the air. So that's a really significant when we talk about this crisis, as we'll see. And they do a buying to assuage their guilt. I saw a post that was always great when I go through the duty-free section at the airport and had a little kid with a blanket and said, "Daddy, what did you bring me?" It was a little poster cut out. And it encouraged me to go in and buy one of those M&M dispensers. I have so many M&M dispensers from when my kids were little. So I feel guilty coming back from a business trip that I buy that for them. So that's kind of the shopping habits. They're trying to make up for that feeling they have. So what's happening during the crisis? It's been very disruptive for balancers. Totally disrupted their work routine. The way they manage their work time and their personal time is completely interacted and changed. It's very disrupting. So how they do that is their education. Now they're very much involved with their kids. Having to get in and understand their math problems, their algebra, their geometry, what has changed so much when you took school. And how you do spend more time. You're cooking at home. So maybe a company makes a sauce mix that you would cook spaghetti with, and it's quick. But now maybe you join together with the store can say, here's what you could add to it and cook with your kids. And they could add ingredients and make it more fun. So the cooking becomes more of a shared experience instead of the adults doing it. So the kids are involved. So they have to manage that. And that's what's really changed in this, of course, working from home. You see people's offices. If I could see all of you, you see people's offices. Where do they carve out the place to do their video conferences? What's their bookshelf look like? Does their child come running in the room, as we saw with Lana earlier on? We've seen that. So I think we've all had it. It's fun. You're actually seeing people working from home. It's a little surprising at first, but we're actually forming stronger personal connections. Even though we're becoming physically apart, we're kind of forming stronger socially connections because we're into people's homes. We're saying, wow, I didn't know you're into that. I didn't, you see a poster on the wall or a picture or whatever. It's just kind of fascinating. So that's all changing. So if we talk about the pivoting options, how can I assist the customer with their changing needs? How do they help deal with those worries? And how can I help them adopt better? So what products in my portfolio do I have? Like I said, a grocery store. Do you have ways that you can help families cook? What are fun kid joining meals you can make together? That's something a grocery store can do on their product portfolio. We'll talk about Apple in a minute. Price. Price is very important because people do have less spending power. This is an economic crisis as well as a health crisis. And it's going to be that way coming out of the COVID. So pricing is important, but you also want to make sure you don't disrupt your brand value. We'll show you Apple, because Apple's got a very high price point. How can they make sure the consumer feels like they're getting a value, at the same time they don't undermine their value proposition? And then communication. How do you address that? How do you do that in a way? And we're seeing that a lot. I'm not sure that's in Georgia yet, but certainly here in the United States, you're seeing a lot of commercials talking about what companies are doing and how they're changing the way they do stuff, how you can order. I saw where Lincoln just last night, excuse me, the car company, well, actually you can buy the car completely online and they deliver the car actually to your door. All the paperwork's done and the car is yours. All the titling's done. So they're very much adapting to that need. Okay, and finally, delivery, how do you, which I've just mentioned about Lincoln, how do you do that in a way that's different? Okay, so let's look at Apple as an example. So if we talk about balancer customers, how do they change from pre to post? So let's look at pre. So how they looked at Apple was the need state, I want to integrate my devices to simplify my transition from on the go at work and on the go at home. So the devices is really a management tool. That's pre-crisis. Their tension point was I feel guilty that I'm not always there with my family. So what do they do? The MacBook, iPad, iPhone, they do the Pro Series, better display, and they can really merge your devices together. So your phone, you can manage on the go between your phone and your laptop. You can take your laptop to work, you can take it home. And so that was their pre-crisis. So how does that change? What we know is the need state. They need to involve my family and enhance our time together, because now we're in a much tighter. It's not on the go, back and forth, and moving about. How to enhance our time together if we're together all the time? What's the tension point? A lot of balancer parents are very worried that there's so much bad news. How is this affecting my child? They're going to school. They got these fears. Their grandparents are getting sick. Sometimes they'll hear about relatives of friends. It's a very scary time for them. And how are they adjusting to that? This might be called the COVID generation, not Generation X, not Generation Y, but this would be the COVID generation, depending how long this goes and how much an effect it'll have on them. So we worry about that as parents. It's a big concern. So product could be a free Apple TV. So what that means is that you could actually then take the devices and the kids doing their homework, and you could put it up on the big screen TV and be involved in their homework in a family style, and then watch an iTunes movie together afterwards. So you really say, how do we use devices? So Apple could offer the Apple TV as a unifying device with the portfolio. It would be something very strong for them. So that's balancers. Let's look at butterflies. This is a completely different lifestyle. So these are butterflies. They're kind of like the Georgian version of the Sex and the City girls, if you remember them. They're very smart. They're very social. Sometimes you think they're shallow because they're so social, but they're very sharp. They're well educated, but the social thing is very big. They're skewed female, but not always. David Beckham, for example, is a butterfly. Tom Brady, I get killed in New England. Tom Brady is a butterfly. Giselle's more of a peacock. And then what do they like? What are their need states? Very social. They enjoy sharing moments with friends. Always in touch with them via Messenger and social networks. They're very active online, which is important for Apple. And what do they worry about? This is, again, in life in general. In very much enjoyment seeking, they hate boredom. Boredom's like the kiss of death for them. And they hate to be left out on alone. To be left out and to miss out on something is very big to them. And if you're not one of them, you certainly know one around you and this will kind of rings true to you. And with their shopping habits, they're very impulsive, make decisions as they go. If it can do something that gives them gratification in the short term, they're much more likely to act. So during the crisis, their lifestyles changed very much. They have more free time at home, and how they're doing more tutorials, personal development. They're reading books like self-improvement. How do I do this to come out of it in a better way? Because they're optimistic. They know there's a better way. So they're using this time to do that. They're working on their health. They're doing, how do I get a stationary bike at home? You see them out running, how they can encourage that when they're doing it and still do social distancing. So all those things are very important. And then work, like the balancers, but tougher for them because their working space, their home is smaller. So how do they carve out? They want to work at their kitchen table or at their kitchen breakfast nook or whatever it happens to be. They don't want to be working from the bedroom. So how do they work that out? Space, what are they sharing with their friends at work that are now, the lines are very much crossed. So that's changed very much. So let's look at Apple portfolio pre-crisis again. So with the need state, I need, for a butterfly, I need to have the latest gadgets to stay ahead of the curve and demonstrate how trendy I am. That was a big need state for them. And so the MacBook Air would be was a product that's the epitome of it. Just like the Mini Cooper is the ultimate car for them because it's fun, it's playful, it's stylish, you can accessorize. The lifestyle tension points. I'm really afraid of becoming boring and average. That's what they're worried about. And this crisis is affecting that. So the product that pre-crisis has been, the stylish MacBook Air and the iPhone, you connect them so you can constantly take and edit and post on social media. It's a real nice conversion. And you have the Pro Series as well as the MacBook Air, but it all has the Retina display, the Pro aspect to it on the display. So that comes, very vivid colors, et cetera. So they love that. That's pre-crisis. How's it changed? The need state is that the devices have a much more important role. They were important before, but now they're a lifeline. It's like a lifeboat between them and their friends. So how they stay connected and have fun, even when we're apart. Anxious they lost that daily connections that have been important. They're really worried that they're left out. This is really an existential threat to their existence. Just like we talked about balance or worrying about how it's affecting their children, and that's what keeps us awake at night. Butterflies are worried about, what's happening and I'm missing out on. When do I get out of this lockdown? When do I get back into a life? And it's a very hard thing for them. So the product, you could do, and this could be an idea that could work very well for them, is really what we're doing now. You have Zoom, but imagine you could have a movie in the center from iTunes that you could share, where iTunes, if you subscribe to a movie, rent a movie, you could share it with your 5 best friends. And so you can watch a movie like The Notebook, and if you're a butterfly, you certainly know the movie The Notebook. It's a very romantic movie. So you're watching that and you're crying together, you're watching together, you could pause the movie and you do it. That's the next best thing. So that's something that Apple could do very well. And again, link in their Apple TV, but the iTunes product in their portfolio and how they spread that out into the friends and family of the butterfly would be a big help. So that's what's going on in the crisis. But there's going to be light. We're going to come out of this thing. I don't think it's ever going to be the same because we're going to have other viruses out there, other concerns like this. So we'll be worried, and there's possible reboot of this thing in the fall. So what's that change? And it's a watershed event. So what's that going to affect? And I think finally what's been hitting around the surface now is there's going to be a much more enhanced relationship between the stakeholders of the brand, including the consumer. Where really brand value has always been focused on what's the brand value to our customers, but what about what's the brand value to other stakeholders, the supply chain? What is your brand doing for your supply chain? That's really important because during this crisis, we've learned that. How important is our supply chain? They're not just somebody who's trying to sell me something. They really have helped me out a lot. If I'm a small business, your supply chain has become critical. The community. Consumers are going to look about how did you react during this? We saw a company in Los Angeles that got a stimulus package. They're called the Shake Shack. And the Shake Shack got a stimulus package, but they're pretty well funded. So they gave that money back to the government, said, the money's running out, let's give it to small independent restaurants. That showed a real community involvement because they're somebody they were looked at as competitors, but they're saying we're all in this together. So Shake Shack is going to come out of this thing very strong. And that's going to affect how people look at them about, where am I going to go after I've been out on a Friday night in California? I'd rather go to Shake Shack than maybe their competitor. So also, what's happening with the planet? So that matters. How did you treat your employees in this crisis? People aren't going to forget. So it's really a chance to be, the Turks have a phrase they call a bad day friend. Are you a bad day friend to your suppliers, to your employees? Are you helping them through it? So we'll see that happen. So usually we'll see sales and profits increase by how you deliver customer value. But if you can deliver shareholder involvement in providing that value to multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders, but multiple stakeholders, that'll really much more affect your brand value going forward. So let's give an example of that. Here's a brand architecture. I don't want to get too much into the marketing of this, but a brand architecture, this is a model developed by Sergio Zeman, my former colleague at Coca-Cola. He's the chief marketing officer there. And he put it into 3 tiers. The first tier, it's on consumer motivations. What are the cost to entry requirements? What's minimally required for me to consider this brand as a consideration to buy? Then what differentiates it? Those are more functional benefits. And finally, what's the crucial emotional experience? So that's a brand architecture. So those things matter because which things are differentiating. If we saw with Apple, some of the benefits were emotional. I'm worried about being left out. And some are very functional. How does my device tie together? So those things are all matter. Let's take IKEA. IKEA clearly understands they're not about their competitor, Kika, for example, sells sofas. If you go to the showroom, you'll see all the sofas. But if you go into IKEA, you'll see a room experience. And they involve you in a room experience. So it says, this is a better way. So their brand architecture really gets up to that. The cost of entry, it's got to be a good deal. If it's not a good deal, I just can't afford IKEA. I love it, but I can't afford IKEA. It might be what the customer says. Then what they differentiate, they make you feel appreciated when you go into IKEA. They're there to help you. They don't intrude. They don't try to sell you, but they're there to answer your questions. And their distinctive shirts show them that you can ask them questions about what you're considering. But the crucial experience is a better way. Is there a better way to do my room setting? And now that we're working from home, we're very painfully aware of how workable our home space is these days. So let's concentrate on the better way. That's the way. Inspiring a better way is the crucial emotional experience that IKEA offers their customers. So how do they do that? We have a thing called a brand halo. We actually developed this with IKEA several years ago. And what it is saying, how you treat your employees, how you treat the community, the value you add to the community, the value you add to your employee actually creates a halo effect that affects how your consumer value is. So we call it the brand halo. And it's kind of an extension of this brand architecture, if you will. So IKEA, again, inspires a better way. So what could that mean for employees? I want to work for a company that respects I have a lot to offer at work, but also I'm a valuable and contributing role of my friend and my family and my community. That's the way they have to make sure those employee values, it's a better way to work together. And IKEA really focuses on that. In the community, a company is competitive but fair and ethical at the same time. It adds sustainable value to the community and its employees and customers. So you'll see IKEA when they build a new store, and hopefully everybody asks me, when's it coming to Tbilisi? I don't know, but hopefully soon. But when you go there, they'll build it, and you'll see they'll do a competitive bidding, but in a very public way about where their site will be. So where local mayors are involved, how they get, so it's not behind closed doors, it's much more open, because that's a better way to conduct business. And then you'll see how they, when they're building it, they'll have the obligatory fence around it, but they'll cut holes in the fence where you can see the construction going on. So they're very open about what they're doing. Everything's very open. So that's what they do, you'll see. So it's a very different way to look at it. So it's brand value is not just about how you deliver value to the customer, but how you deliver value to your employees, how you deliver value in the community, and then extend that even further to how might delivering value to suppliers and the planet. We're going from this one crisis, the next crisis coming down the line. In fact, a lot of people say this crisis is contributing to that is that we're moving into the Spanish flu, this flu virus is a transmission from animals to humans. The more we go in to the Amazon jungles, as the ice sheets melt and things like that, we're going to see new things come out. So how we treat the planet is very important that I think companies are more and more aware of. Again, these are some good things that will come out of this crisis, but we need to be ready for it and start thinking about how we pivot our brand in the crisis and then coming out of the crisis.